Hare Krishna. Welcome to our new part of our reading of the book Alien Identities. We will continue in the introduction, we discuss in this video series this book Alien Identities by Richard L. Thompson. I will read and speak about this topic of UFOs, Vedic knowledge, aliens, and we hope to have an entertaining video series. So, epistemology. Many people regard UFO research as something that is not intellectually respectable, and this includes many who are interested in Vedic thought, either from a scholarly or a traditional religious point of view. At the same time, many serious UFO researchers feel that to bring old mythology into a discussion of UFOs is unscientific and can only lead to useless mystical speculation. It is therefore important for me to give some justification for writing on the theme of UFOs and Vedic literature. I will begin by making a few observations on the shortcomings of UFO evidence, and then I will point out how the study presented in this book might help overcome them. So the author explains that for the spiritual people, those who read Vedic scriptures, for the devotees of the Hare Krishna movement, it might be a little bit strange to read books about UFOs or go into this topic, and he says it might not be intellectually respectable. Also for many other people outside of the spiritual devotee or spiritual-minded person, especially those who are interested in Vedic literature, for many people to believe in UFOs or be interested in this topic or read books, it might be, as he says, intellectually not very respectable. It might look strange. Yeah, it's a topic which is put aside as being maybe esoteric and just plain nonsense sometimes. So, and also actually the Hare Krishna devotees in general are quite open-minded, open for all kinds of things, but even for them that might be not so important or serious. And for the other point of view, he says, for the serious researcher about UFOs to bring in Vedic knowledge and its stories about UFOs or similar topics, they might say, oh, this is mythology and this is some fairy tale, and don't bring this into our serious discussion, which makes our topic ridiculous. So both sides, interesting, he explains here, might be a little bit averse to the other, and so he says interesting to bring this now together with his study. And he says within his book, and he says he will begin by explaining the shortcomings of the information, or as he says, UFO evidence, and then he will, based on that, see what are the true or more scientific, plausible evidence about UFOs. One notable weakness in this body of evidence is that there appears to be no way of performing a reproducible experiment that will give us reliable information about UFOs. UFO phenomena do not fall under human control, and they seem even more elusive than many rare meteorological phenomena which can be observed systematically by waiting for appropriate conditions. The physicist Edward Kendon hinted humorously at a possible reason for this. The question of ETA, extraterrestrial actuality, would be settled in a few minutes if a flying saucer were to land on the lawn of a hotel where a convention of the American Physical Society was in progress, and its occupants were to emerge and present the special paper to the assembled physicists, revealing where they came from and the technology how their craft operates. So, a notable or obvious, let's say like this, very obvious reason or weakness of the evidence is that we cannot reproduce it, right? In science, it's very important that they can reproduce whatever they want to study, right? They want to reproduce the effects of it in an experiment or its existence. But UFOs are sometimes seen, often, most of the time not. It's a rare thing to see it, so the accounts are very rare. And of course, over time, they collected many accounts, but to see which are really true, plausible, and which are not, it's difficult. So this is difficult to really say UFOs exist and this is what they are, if there is, in that sense, no proof for them. Other things you can, he says, even meteorological phenomena you can study, because they quite often appear, even though you might not be able to create them. But very often you have the rain, you have the hail, you have the snow, whatever. Just wait for the right moment and it comes and you can study it. And this physicist Edward Condon said here that it would be very easy to say they exist if they would show themselves more or less and explain themselves. Of course. Yeah, of course. But this is not the case. So I'm also quite curious and excited to see which accounts we will hear and how much can we accept, if we can accept them. I must honestly say I myself really grew up as being an UFO and alien believer. Some or other, maybe it was just a phase actually of my parents to watch some Eric von Däniken videos. So as a child was seeing a couple of them a couple of times. Documentations about UFO sightings, but not so much the sightings is what I remember. I remember more that he was showing the UFO depictions of ancient cultures, and how ancient cultures in sculptures or in carvings were showing flying saucers, and sometimes also the spacemen inside, some aliens inside. So we know about this also from the movies, right? The Greys. This is where they are typically depicted as small-bodied, maybe 150 centimeters in size, thin body, big head, big almond-shaped eyes, dark, no hair, small mouth. Some or other, this is kind of the standard depiction of aliens. Of course, through time, I don't know, this somehow or other was more, they were often shown like that, or this is how they were put into our minds at least. But in time, there were many movies which were showing aliens looking quite different actually. Like as I mentioned last time in the first video in this movie, Independence Day, with Will Smith, they were showing kind of more like some reptiles, kind of, who had some psychic powers. They could communicate in the mind, right? One scientist in the movie was a medium, and he was speaking what the alien wanted him to say, right? So they were intelligent, but looking quite animalistic, and more like reptiles kind of, and thin-haired, thin-limbed, more like what are they called in English? Grashüpfer. Oh, I forgot. I don't know the English word. Grasshopper, right? Like a grasshopper, like this. And also in this other movie I was seeing many years ago in the 90s. What was the name? I forgot. Starship Trooper. I think it was the name. Starship Trooper. Where they were also attacked by aliens who were on another planet, and then they were flying there, and also they looked like more like grasshoppers, big grasshoppers, some insects, big insects, and they were not so intelligent. They were just fighting for survival and killing. Some or other, they were not so intelligent. So it's interesting. Sometimes aliens are shown as being more intelligent. humanoid in temper, in mind. And the other thing is, others on the other side, they are more animalistic from their mentalities, let's say like this. And interesting, when they are more animalistic, their cruelty and aggression is more justified, because animals, they don't think, they can kill, and this is what they do. Whereas the more intelligent and conscious a living entity is, the more is also empathy and love and like a higher cultured behavior is expected then. So, and this is then also shown through communication, like in this alien movie with Will Smith, Independence Day. They could communicate, but they were not talking to themselves out of some reason. Because if they would talk, immediately it makes them more intelligent somehow or other, and then some more human, well-wishing behavior would be expected. So as I said, I was growing up as with this information kind of, and also I saw these lines of Nazca somewhere in South America, which Eric von Däniken means these were some carvings in the earth by aliens. If you don't know that these lines from Nazca are pictures with simple lines in the earth, which are huge, sometimes miles long, kilometers long, and they show some animals, butterflies and things like this, sometimes a straight line for 20 kilometers or something. And they are very old. Yeah, they are known to be very old. Nobody knows who did that and when. So he says this is some sign for an extraterrestrials, because who could make this beautiful depictings, these big ones, if you're not way above the earth where you can see them. When you're down there, you cannot see anything. And how can you do them on the earth? Yeah. So whatever, Eric von Däniken has interesting information, definitely. So anyway, I grew up with this kind of knowledge, so I was always open to it. I was not really researching it. Sometimes maybe reading a book and some accounts and this and that, and I was open to the idea. So for me now, interesting also to reflect that, is this just some myth, some fairy tale? Am I believing that because of the upbringing, or is there some reason behind it? Can such a belief be justified if we study it? Are there more arguments against it or for it? So I don't know if this book will solve it, but it will give definitely some information this direction. Yeah, so I'm in myself curious what he will explain to us, how convincing this information will be, so that we don't believe too easily. I think for some of us at least, this might be a problem, that we are too quick to accept. Yeah, out of whatever reason, we just might have some tendency towards something and we want it to be true and we easily accept. With God, it can be also like that. How rational is our faith? I think to some degree our faith should be rational, but not over-rational, because of course, in regards to the transcendence, we cannot expect the in German you can say ratio, but you don't say it in English, ratio, something else. But anyway, your rationality is not proof for God's existence, or is not the main reason for accepting God. But it's a good indicator, and there are many reasons for accepting. But to go into a transcendental experience, or to strive for it, there is transcendental method should be applied, and rationality will not reveal God. It might hint strongly at God, but the revelation is happening then through something else. And according to Vedic scriptures, this something else is then is called bhakti, or devotional service, or a spiritual, devotional, loving exchange with the Supreme. And a personal relationship in the end, even. Yeah, mystical, yogic, personal, metaphysical relationship experience. Okay, so let's continue the reading. The problem is that UFOs are connected in many reports with human-like beings that seem to have superhuman technological powers. Yeah, it's interesting. Human being, yeah, human-like, that's, yeah, the many accounts speak about that. And they have technological superior powers, or superhuman technological powers. Yeah, it's interesting. They have some, so the point is technological superiority. Not that they have intellectual, of course, not in all regards, but okay, let's say they are not so, let's say, enlightened, or they are known for being superior to humans because of emotions or relationships or literature or whatever. No, it's just their technological thing, what they have, that they have these flying saucers. More, we don't know much more about them than that. So UFOs are the object of study, and these living entities are kind of the byproduct of it, because this is how they reveal themselves, how they would travel here, and how we would get in exchange with them. So to see who they are, what they are, where they're from, how their society and civilization works, this is something else. If this is true, then we can study these beings only to the degree that they are willing to reveal themselves to us. But as Condena's remarks suggest, if they exist, they have shown little willingness to cooperate with human investigators. Yeah, it's true. Why would they just fly around? Interesting, huh? They haven't done more than that. They were just, if they exist, they would just rarely fly with their spaceship through the sky, and that's about it. And sometimes they're seen, sometimes they're not seen. Do they want to be seen? Why don't they fly more? And by daytime over a big city? Or, yeah, what do they want? What if they're so intelligent to have such a thing to fly, which is obviously, as reported, they are the superior technology than ours? What do they want to achieve with just flying around here? Of course, later on we will hear other information. So I heard about this, that there are, and it's supposed that these aliens were the culprits of cow mistreatments. Yeah, mistreat cows who were missing some legs, and where blood was taken away. And it said that aliens took this for genetical experiments, or humans were abducted and for genetical experiments and others. And in this book are some accounts of that there too. So it's not that they just fly around. Sometimes other things happen, or so they get in contact with people, but not to be seen, not to get into dialogue and have exchange. So in that sense, they seem to be mischievous if they just come and take someone for their own purposes. There's even evidence suggesting that they may try to deliberately keep people in the dark about their activities and their real nature. This possibility cannot be ruled out a priori, and thus UFO phenomena may be inherently difficult to study by standard scientific methods. Yeah, by a standard scientific method is hard to study because we haven't caught one. If we would catch one of them and the UFO, maybe it happened. There are so many reports, but anyway, this would be the standard method. So, but so it's difficult to study. So in that sense, it's just a point. It's difficult to say they exist because scientifically it was not proven or not communicated. Who knows? The secret agencies of the world might have. Right, in Roswell also they said that a UFO crashed and they found it, but they were never telling anyone what was happening there, right? So there is the secrecy also by the humans, not just by the aliens. Also the humans somehow or other keep this away from the people. Yet even if a phenomenon is completely unpredictable and uncontrollable, it might still be expected to leave some hard evidence that can be scientifically evaluated. Where are the photographs and instrument readings that record the flight of UFOs? Where can we find UFO hardware or tangible physical evidence of UFO landings and other activities? Interestingly enough, there are many reports of hard UFO evidence in the form of ground traces of landings, photographic records, physical injuries suffered by UFO witnesses. In addition, books have been written arguing that government authorities have collected a great deal of high-quality UFO evidence, which they keep hidden on the grounds of military secrecy. Okay, so he goes into that. Just because we don't know much about them, the people in general, doesn't mean there are no hard scientific proofs for their existence, and that there are some informations about their existence. I myself have been told by an engineer involved in military weapons testing that high-quality UFO photos were regularly taken in the 1950s by technical personnel known to him, but that these photos have never been revealed to the public. I discussed this controversial topic in chapters 1 and 3. Wow, that's interesting, huh? That there was an engineer, weapon engineer involved with military weapons, and he said in the 50s there were many high quality pictures taken by probably the American military or something like that of UFOs, and there are these proofs, but this was never shown, and he will go more into detail about this, of course, controversial topic. So this is definitely interesting, that there might be real evidence for the existence out there. Although hard evidence for UFOs does exist, and the evidence readily available to the public says very little by itself, it can only take on significance in the context of a complete story involving witnesses whose honesty and competence can be evaluated. This is illustrated by the following example. In 1987, a building contractor named Ed Walters claimed that he made a videotape of a UFO that was flying near his backyard in Gulf Breeze, Florida. Dr. Bruce Maccabee, why are they always called Maccabee? A physicist and UFO investigator, made the following evaluation of this videotape. So there was one guy who made a videotape of an UFO flying his backyard. Wow, we also have a backyard here in our compound, big backyard. So yeah, maybe we should watch the skies more often. I heard about many reports, but Germany, I don't know if it's blessed so much with UFO sightings. Somehow or other, other countries, they are always coming up with some reports and videotapes. Yeah? One other phenomenon are the Kornkreise. I don't know how they're called in English. The signs in the fields, right? Very beautiful, beautiful symbols and patterns. And they say also that non-extraterrestrial living entities were doing that. So sometimes we had them in Germany. I never saw them myself, I just saw photographs, but yeah, they are reported, and there are people who research them and collect the photographs and go to the places where it happened and research it, and they say there's some other reason behind natural or human reasons. If the only information, now this Dr. Bruce Maccabee says, if the only information about this sighting were Ed's testimony and the pictorial information contained within the videotape itself, I would seriously consider the hoax hypothesis, in spite of the demonstrated difficulty in duplicating the videotape. However, taken in the complete context of the sighting, with the other witnesses testifying that they saw Ed videotape the UFO, I conclude that Ed did not produce this videotape using a model. Rather, I conclude that he videotaped a true UFO. Okay, so he looks from different points of view, how valid is the information, and he comes to the conclusion now that he really saw a UFO. In general, why might it be interesting for us to think about UFOs and talk about it and make a video series about it? First, similar reasons as the authors. This gives credibility to my tradition, to my source text, to the Vedas, to say, wow, look, they knew about that. They documented that. And for them, actually, it was normal. For us nowadays, it's also normal. We have airplanes. It's not unusual, just that they are not from this earth. That might be unusual. But at that time, they knew these flying objects, and they knew they come from other places. They knew that the universe is full of life and there are all kinds of living entities. And it seems that Vedic scripture was written in a time when the universe was kind of a village. Everyone knew everyone. Like the planets were neighbors. So the inhabitants of the planets, they were neighbors and they could travel. There was exchange, as we have exchanged now between continents. So they had exchange between their planets and their worlds and their dimensions even. In the Bhagavatam is a description of a king who traveled into another dimension of one of the highest living entities or devas in the universe. And he could go there. It's unfortunately, it's not said how he went there. It was just he went there, but he went from Earth. He just went to the Lord's, to the world of Brahma. It's another dimension, actually. By mystical power or traveling, no, it's not said. He went there. So for them, going from one place to the other, even though being in another dimension, it was kind of normal. So they didn't have to explain. If I say I go now to Munich, nobody's amazed or interested. Where you traveling with train or plane or plane, probably not, car or what? It's not such a big, I go to Munich. Yeah, nobody is super interested in the information how I went there. It's just normal to go there. So, but sometimes we hear also in Vedic scriptures detailed explanations about flying objects. Yeah. As in all such cases, the videotape taken by itself might be a hoax. Maccabee was able to rule this out only by interviewing the people involved in making the tape and evaluating their character and motives. If he was right in his evaluation, then the tape shows us what a particular UFO looked like, and thus it provides useful evidence. But whether he was right or wrong, most people must depend on his report in order to assess the validity of the tape. I was talking about why we should read this now, get this information in general. I said, okay, to give credibility to Vedic scriptures, but also to expand actually our understanding of the world we live in and the worlds we live in or the universe we live in, and to shake a bit our foundation and to get out of our small box-like mind, which only thinks reality is that what we're according to the information we were fed by the educational system or the government. I believe myself, many maybe might agree with me. I believe that we were fed a bunch of lies too, which limit our understanding of the world we live in and limit our possibilities and how we use the life. Because we are manipulated in our mind and put into a small framework. Okay, this is what is possible for you and your life, which is the time between birth and death. And that's about it. And just function in our society, in our system, and do your job, get a little bit of money to maintain yourself, and that's about it, and be happy with that. But if we know way more, if we know their universe has other living entities are there, and why are they there, and what's the purpose of life itself and all that. So yeah, our horizon should be expanded. We should be open for other things, but of course, as I said, with a rational base. And he tries to do that, to put in this phenomenon, but based on rationality, to see if it's real true. So we should not easily believe, but we also should not too easily abolish or doubt, right? There's one bad thing, it's called blind faith. If you blindly believe everything, that's not good, of course. But if we blindly doubt everything, it's also not good. So we should consider and be as objective as possible, as neutral as possible, and then come to judgment. So be neutral, thinking about it, not being colored, not tending right from the beginning towards one direction, and then come to judgment. But whether he was right or wrong, most people must depend on his report in order to assess the validity of the tape. The only alternative would be to go to Gulf Breeze and conduct one's own investigation, as some people have done. But as time passes, this option becomes less and less feasible. We can conclude that most readily available UFO evidence takes the form of reports in which the testimony of witnesses and investigators is of crucial importance. Since one cannot arrange to see UFO phenomena at will, the hard evidence is meaningless without accompanying testimony. One has no alternative but to rely on such reports or make one's own investigations. And one's own investigations simply result in more reports of people to read. Yeah, so this is the problem, of course. Okay, you can become a UFO researcher. I don't want that. For me, this is a real, let's say like this, a minor topic in my life. I just do that out of, give some interesting, exciting information to you and to bring in, of course, Vedic knowledge, and that we look into that. I think this is more purposeful. But yeah, we rely, so if we don't become UFO researchers, we rely on these accounts, these reports, and you can believe them or not believe them, more or less. How do you know? Even they sound very convincing, but how do we really know, right? So of course we can have then more reports. As you said, you need, like, let's say like this, you hear a report of a UFO sighting by person A, and you think, oh, it's interesting, but I don't know. Oh, there's a report by person B about the same account, same situation. And I think, oh, there are already two. And you have C, D, E, F. Okay, you have 10 people telling kind of the same thing. You might say, wow, then it must be true. Okay, sounds convincing, but still you rely on their reports. But at the same time, 10 different people, 10 times the same report, then we can accept them, but still the base is the report. In this book, I will not, with one or two exceptions, be presenting the results of personal investigations of UFO witnesses. Rather, I will take UFO evidence from a wide variety of available reports. One consequence of this procedure is that I will not be able to prove the truth of any of the reports that I cite. Proof, insofar as it is possible, can come only from in-depth investigation of particular cases. Of course, some of the cases I present have been extensively investigated, and the investigators have concluded that the cases are genuine. However, I am not in a position to prove that they are right or show that their investigations were readily carried out properly. Okay, so he makes a disclaimer here. He doesn't say, okay, I will present you the facts. I presented the reports, and he seems to believe in them. He wouldn't present them if he would think they are nonsense, but he just makes a disclaimer. It's not a claim for truth, what he does. That everyone has to do themselves, of course. The aim of a broad survey is to display the overall patterns that run through the reported evidence and thereby gain insight into the causes underlying these patterns. A similar thing is done in the field of archaeology. Some archaeologists do in-depth investigations of particular sites, and others make broad surveys of many archaeological studies without going into any particular study in depth. It is in these surveys that general archaeological theories are formulated. That's interesting, right? Like archaeology, he says, one goes there, he digs in the ground, one little city, village thing, whatever, is revealed. He studies everything, he knows all the details, but he can know only so much about this sighting or this site because he has no time to study the whole world, dig the whole world. So another guy who investigates now this, villages from this time time, then he will take many sightings which were in-depth studied by these people, and then he will make his study and present his case or make a theory, right? He just, refers to their work. And this is accepted, right? This is accepted. Someone, because you can go back then to this reports themselves, they are there. Yeah, so a similar thing he did with this book. Yeah, understand it. Since I'm concerned with comparing the UFO phenomenon to the phenomenon described in the Vedic literature, it is necessary to have a comprehensive understanding of both. However, I have not tried to give a comprehensive survey of Vedic literature since this field is so vast. If the kind of comparative study attempted in this book is worth pursuing, it would be useful for someone to make a more general survey of Vedic texts with the aim of finding out what they say about the origins, powers, cultures, and behavioral traits of different kinds of intelligent living beings. Okay, he will also not go into all the details of Vedic literature, because it's true, this is huge, and then if you really do it, you find irrelevant texts in the Vedas. You take the original Sanskrit, you translate that. Either you can speak Sanskrit yourself, or you have someone who translates it for you. And best is also to take the parts before and after this section to get the context right. And then you find all this information, and then to have a comprehensive understanding of UFOs in the Vedas. So he was not doing that either. He was taking a couple of accounts which he kind of knew and wants to compare these two, but it's not that he studied both of them himself in depth, which is legitimate to do for a scientist, right? If you refer to someone who really knows, that's okay. Since my survey of UFO material is intended to be comprehensive, it inevitably combines material that is relatively well attested with material that seems particularly dubious. I've included some dubious material because suppressing it would result in a false picture of the UFO evidence. An artificially sanitized picture of the UFO scene wouldn't be realistic, and I should warn the reader that when I present the evidence for certain claims, that does not necessarily mean that I regard those claims as valid. In some cases, my aim is to alert the reader to the kind of false material that can be found in the UFO field. Okay, yeah. He presents things which he doesn't believe in to show, okay, these things are out there too, be aware. Okay. Some doubtful looking UFO-related material is certainly phony, yet we should be cautious about superficially rejecting things as false simply because they seem absurd. Information that initially seems absurd or meaningless may prove to be highly significant when seen later on in a broader context. Absurdity is defined only in relation to an accepted theoretical view, and as theoretical insight develops, the status of evidence as absurd or anomalous may also change. It has been said that to listen sympathetically to absurd nonsense compromises one's credibility as an objective scientific thinker. Perhaps this is so, but I would suggest that sympathetic attention to evidence is essential if real advances in scientific knowledge are to be made. Yeah, only because something seems to be even crazy from the status quo understanding of a field of knowledge doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to it. We should listen to it carefully, but we can listen to it, and does not discredit our scientific mind. Or from a non-scientific point of view, if anything in life you hear seems to be crazy according to your understanding of, or something of the understanding of others, of the mass consciousness, you should not be disregarded when you're interested in that kind of nonsense. And you can say, yeah, it's just because of my curiosity. I like, irrational nonsense things. I find it entertaining, right? And maybe it shows itself to be anyway credible in time. Can also be. So in general, right, yeah, we live in a society where someone who is kind of out of the line immediately is looked upon. Oh, is he crazy? Is he strange? Is he weird? Isn't it? We have this collective spirit of uniformity, and if someone dares to not conform to the standard which is set by whomever, suddenly is not part anymore of the community. Yeah, it can go that far. And that shows we don't live in a society of free thinkers, of free beings. free thinking and expression of thought is not encouraged, is not, wow, you think completely different than me, that's amazing. Actually, the opposite is the case. The more different you think and speak and talk and live, the less you are respected, right? And the more similar we are to each other, the more we feel fine and, I don't know, secure. Yeah? Is this somehow rather attacking our feeling of security if someone is different? And different, I mean, in a positive way, actually, in a creative way, and in a also spiritual way. Because from my point of view, the essence of our being is individual, because we are souls who are part of God, and God is the supreme individual, and we as parts of Him are also individuals. So in our true self, as true selves, as souls, we are completely different. We are united, having the same source, but the parts themselves are individuals. So of course, free thinking, other opinions are daring, are challenging for us. And it's not easy to accommodate everything or to accept everything. We don't have to accept everything, but we can accept the freedom of people's expressions of thought, of course. And then comes the point of the is everything then relative? Is then everything okay? That also not. Yeah, of course, I think there is a standard of knowledge and there's a truth and we should conform to that. And there are values and we should share them. I'm against undermining everything and everything is relative and everyone can think and say whatever he likes. No, the development of a person's free expression of freedom should be towards the good, the goodness, the happiness and the true and the beautiful, and that should be defined. Yeah, that should be defined. The truth should be understood and defined, which is of course a huge thing, but still, and it comes out that it's good, it's beautiful. Then freedom should be used to achieve that. Freedom, our expression of freedom, should be an expression or should have the content of this truth then. Yeah. Probably this is how I would bring these two together, right? A standard or an absolute truth and a liberal lifestyle. This was just one thought. Absurdity is defined only in relation to the accepted theoretical view, that we had. It has been said that to listen... I was reading that also. As science advances, ideas once regarded as absurd may later become orthodox. Examples would be the idea that continents drift across the surface of the globe, or the idea that electrons tunnel through energy barriers. Of course, other ideas may prove to be actually invalid, including some that are accepted by mainstream scientists. Yeah, of course, there was always a challenge to anything, and it went through and proved itself to be useful, good, acceptable, and this became then the new standard, right? A revolution, a paradigm change. It happened so often. Doesn't mean that it always went for the better, but that the new and weird was become the normal. This happens often. To keep this book from becoming too large, I've inevitably given emphasis to some UFO cases and neglected others. The same is true of my treatment of Vedic material. Hopefully the sample of cases I've chosen is representative, and the same points could be illustrated using a different representative set of cases. Although certain cases are repeatedly mentioned, this doesn't mean that I regard them as being uniquely significant. Since I'm concerned with tracing patterns in collections of modern and ancient reports, this book can be regarded as a comparative study of folklore. It is certainly legitimate to study folklore, and for many readers this may be the best way to make initial approach to the subject matter of this book. However, in the background of any study of folklore, there's always the question of how the folklore really originated. Is it simply a product of imaginative storytelling motivated by psychological factors, or does it have a basis in objective reality? In the next section, I'll make a few preliminary observations on this topic. Okay. If folklore, he says folklore is something good, legitimate, we shouldn't disregard it if we are sure that it's based on truth and not just, as it says, imaginative storytelling, imagination, or some psychological factors, which could be. So I think this book will give an interesting Querschnitt of UFO accounts, folklore, in Vedic scriptures, other ancient traditions, modern accounts, and he will try to see the patterns, the universal patterns, which connect the accounts. So even though they might have happened at different times, historical settings, but if there are patterns, so that it was always kind of the same thing always happened, we could easily or more easily accept it as truth. When we see, wow, there are many different sources of information which always tell the same story, kind of. Of course, there are variations, but still. Yeah, so we can actually, makes a strong argument for the existence of the UFOs. If we see, wow, in the ancient Vedic scriptures, it was explained in folklore and stories and modern UFO accounts and other ancient books. Yeah, it always happened. Always the same thing happened, and especially if they are not connected, right? If they would be connected, you could see, okay, this was some weird story and it traveled into another culture, another source of knowledge, and was just repeated, maybe in a different setting. Yeah, but it's the same account. But if these are unrelated, unconnected sources of knowledge, always telling the same story, this would make a good case. So let's see how this develops. We are, of course, still in the introduction and will be in the introduction for another 5 pages, which seems not to be much, but because I talk so much, this will probably take us another 2 videos or something. Let's see. I'm quite anxious, excited is the better word, excited for in reading that and presenting this to you. I hope it's also interesting to you. So please like my video, subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time. Hare Krishna.